In today's video, we're going to take a look at Lenox. This is the new pattern from Love Notions, and it is available in a midi and knee dress, a shirt, and a cropped version. I love it, and we're going to do a little bit of a sew along for it today so you can see exactly how I sewed up this beautiful Lenox pattern. And if you weren't aware, Love Notions is having a 40% off site sale today and for the next 2 days. And so you could pick up our newly released Lenox pattern as well as get a few other essentials for your sewing library. So come along with me and let's sew up a dress version of the Lenox, and you can see exactly how easy this pattern really is. So first we're going to print out our pattern. I'm using a large format print, but the pattern also comes with a print at home version where you tape the pieces together, and you can also use a projector with this pattern. I'm going to be doing the square neckline, so I'm cutting out that center front piece that is the square neckline, but there's also that sweetheart neckline that's right next to it, so make sure that you decide which of those you want. And then as far as pattern pieces, there's not too many more than a regular pattern, but this is a princess seamed pattern, so there will be a couple more because of that. I'm planning to sew the short sleeves with the plain sleeve, not the puff sleeve. I'm also going to be sewing the midi skirt, which has a slit. That skirt also has the princess seams carried down, and there is a knee length version as well. For sizing, I'll be sewing a size large bodice, and then I'm going to be using a large blended to an extra large at the hip for the skirt. When it comes to sewing, fabric is everything, and for this knit pattern, I'm going to give a little bit more room to my hips, even though I fit into this straight size large, based on the finished measurement chart. Now, you should definitely take a look at that finished measurement chart to think about how you feel about the intended ease within the pattern and what you're comfortable with. And again, fabric is everything. So if I was using a more structured fabric, I probably wouldn't do this. But since I'm using a double brush poly, which can tend to be clingy, I'd like to have the extra room. Now it's on to some pattern adjustments. There's not too many that I'm going to be making for this pattern, but one of them is shortening the bodice. And I'm going to do that by 1/2 inch. And this is a personal requirement for me as I'm pretty short-waisted. And I know that with this type of pattern, I really want that seam to hit right at my waistline and not be too low. And again, everybody's body is different here. So you might need to lengthen based on your torso length. But I need to shorten, so I'm taking all 3 of the pattern pieces for the bodice, the center front, the side panels, as well as the back, and I'm cutting on the lengthen shorten line, and then I'm going to reattach, retape it on 1/2 inch overlapping them. So this is a very easy adjustment that makes a huge difference in your final product. This is the beauty of sewing, being able to make something that is fit perfectly to you, custom made to your personal measurements. Now, patterns have tons of ways that we can get adjustments on them to fit you perfectly. There are adjustments for height, for your shoulders, for your arm side, for the back. There are adjustments that you can make for a sway back adjustment. You can make a small bust adjustment. This pattern does include a full bust adjustment done for you, and that's one of the reasons why Love Notions patterns are very beloved. If you'd like to get information on making a variety of other adjustments, make sure to check out the lovenotions.com blog. There's tons of information about customizing patterns to your personal taste and your size. Now that I've got my patterns adjusted, I need to make sure to label all of those adjustments on the pattern pieces themselves so that I know that those are made for the next time I make this pattern. Next, I'm going to adjust the pattern pieces for the skirt. Now, I said before that the bodice is going to be a straight size large, but I'm going to be blending from a large to an extra large at the hip. Now, the waist of the pattern is right where the seam is between the bodice and the skirt. And so I'm going to measure 10 inches down from the top of the skirt pattern piece. And I'm going to blend out from a large to an extra large at that point. 10 inches is usually the amount that a person has from their waist area to the hip area. But that could be a measurement that's different for everybody. So I recommend holding the pattern pieces up to your body and seeing where your hip hits. I've started making the adjustments on those side panels because that's where they're most going to be affected for the hip measurement, but I'm also going to be doing the center, front, and back pattern piece. Keep in mind that there are 6 pieces of fabric sewed together for this particular skirt with the midi dress. So I need to make these adjustments, however slight, on all of those pieces. Now that I've got my adjustments done, I'm ready to start placing the pattern pieces onto the fabric. Now, I have 2 yards of this floral double brush poly that I really want to use for this midi dress. And I could switch over to a knee length dress, but I really want that midi dress with the slit. So I am making it work with pattern piece Tetris. And I think I've got it figured out. Now, one of the things that I do is to make a duplicate of those patterns that say to cut 4 pieces. So I'm cutting out on a double layer, but I am making a duplicate pattern piece to check the spacing for those pieces that require 4 total cuts. Now, it's very tempting to change the grain line of these pattern pieces to accommodate the fabric that I have, but I really highly suggest not compromising on that because it will affect your final product. As you're cutting, make sure to transfer all of those markings. There are a few that are very essential, so this is a great time to transfer those markings. And I'm done, and look how much I have left. I would say that this is almost a zero waste project. Now it's time to prep the neckbands before we start sewing. We're going to need to fold them in half lengthwise, and then we're going to attach the short one to the center front panel. We're going to set that back neckband to the side for a second, and we need to attach the back bodice to the side panels at the shoulder seams. After we get that done, then we can attach that back neckband. If you'd like to, now would be a good time to insert a piece of clear elastic into the shoulder seams. A lot of people like to do this for knit patterns because it gives it a little bit more strength. Now, as we sew this pattern, I'm going to be using a combination of a serger and a regular sewing machine, but the entire pattern can definitely be sewed with just a regular sewing machine. Now let's get that back neckband attached. So we're going to take the back bodice and front side panels that have been already attached to the shoulders, and we're going to line the back neckband up, matching up those T markings to the end of the neckband piece. But we want to make sure that we mark 1 inch away from the end of the neckband on each side of it, and we want to stop sewing at that point. We want to leave a little flap open at the end of the back neckband on each side. So it'll be 1 inch away from that T marking. This is a part of the pattern that I think really benefits from a visual. So now that we have the back neckband sewn on, we need to attach the center front panel at the princess seams. So we've got that center panel with the neckband already attached, and we're going to line it up with the bottom of the bodice, and we're going to pin all along that princess seam, and then we're going to slide it in between the flap of the back neckband and the rest of that side panel. Once that's all very securely aligned from the end of the bodice up to the top of the center front, then you can take that flap and fold it over or just place it over the rest of the center front at the neckband. So it will get caught up when you're sewing the princess seams. That flap needs to go over that center front. So go ahead and take that flap that's remaining and clip it onto over the center front band. So this is what it would look like from the reverse side. And you'll see that you have the neckband coming down. You've got the center front panel underneath the neckband, and then it's got the side panel. Now, before you start sewing through that bodice princess seam, you're going to want to top stitch the center front panel. And when you do that, you're going to tack down that end of the neckband that should be popping up a little bit. So before we sew the princess seam, we're going to catch the end of the neckband into the top stitching of the center front. Now, if you prefer to do your top stitching all at the end, you could also just tack down the neckband at the end and then go ahead and do the pass along through the princess seams and around the neckline. So that's kind of what I did here because I really prefer a serged finishing on the inside. So I haven't yet done my top stitching, but this is what the view of this should look like in regular fabric. That back neckband is tucked behind the center front neckband, and then on top of that is the princess seam side panel. I think this joining is really beautiful and crisp. And once I get the top stitching on there, it will look even more elegant. Here's my top stitching process. I'm using a pink thread, which will contrast with the navy blue background of this double brush poly. Top stitching on knit fabric can be a little difficult, so take your time and go slow. And I'm using a stitch length of 3.5 millimeters. And if you didn't catch that center front panel and you need to do a turn here, I highly suggest that when you get to that corner, that you leave your needle down and then you pivot your fabric around the needle. Make it nice and crisp by leaving your needle down. I guess you wouldn't have to top stitch necessarily, but I think it really sets off those princess seams nicely. Now it's time to attach the sleeves. Make sure that you are lining up those double T markings and single T markings. It's very easy for especially beginners to get those sleeves mixed up. So make sure that those are marked and that you're matching those up carefully. When you're attaching a sleeve, especially for a beginner, it can seem like impossible because you're going to be taking a convex shape and attaching it to a concave shape. So it seems like they won't match up, but the lines are each the same length. So we should be able to get that fabric kind of twisted around and into a position where those lines can match up, as long as those markings are matched up as well. I highly suggest using lots of pins or clips to attach your sleeves, and if you want further help, check out Noreen's video all about attaching a sleeve perfectly. So we're going to set aside the bodice for a moment, and we're going to work on that skirt. Now there are 6 pattern pieces with the skirt. We have on the front, we have the center front, and then 2 side panels, and then on the back, we have the back piece and 2 side panels as well. The skirt also in the midi length offers a slit. So as you are pinning those side panels to the center front, decide which place you want to have the slit and make sure that you mark that clearly so you don't accidentally go over it when you are sewing. So here I'm just clipping those side panels to the center front of the skirt. I'm going to use lots of clips because I want to make sure that the fabric is all lined up correctly and I don't have lots of puckers or gathers. As you're sewing, make sure to stop and secure your stitch line at the notch for the slit. Again, I like a serged interior, so I've serged all the way down until the slit marking, then I've sewn it with a line of regular stitching from a sewing machine, and then I've just did a little slit into the seam allowance. So here you can see that little line of stitching going down, and I'm folding back the seam allowance so that I can top stitch around it to create the slit. That snip will allow me to fold back the seam allowance so that I can top stitch around for the slit. One thing I like about the midi dress version versus the knee-length version is these slit opportunities as well as the princess seams being carried down. I think they're so pretty. Now that I've got it all top stitched, I'm going to secure my serger tails and trim the rest of the threads all around. We are so close to being done. All we have to do now is attach the bodice to the skirt. And we're going to do that one at a time, front skirt and then back skirt. So make sure that when you're sewing the bodice to the skirt that you, first of all, have the right skirt, front versus back, and that you also are matching up those princess seams. As you go over those, make sure that you are going carefully and that you're using the same seam allowance all the way through. If you don't, then the seam between your bodice and the skirt will get a little weird. And again, make sure to line up those princess seams. It's such a statement on the dress, and it would be a shame not to have them match up correctly. Same on the back, except for you don't have to worry too much about matching up those princess seams. Now it's time to sew up those side seams. I highly suggest matching up those hems first, the hem at the sleeve and the hem at the skirt, and then match up the bodice line, and then go through and put the rest of the pins in so that you can keep everything nice and straight. Now the only thing left to do is to hem the sleeves and to hem the skirt. But first we have to do a fit check. Now, does anybody else leave their jeans on while they do a fit check? Because that's kind of the only way to do it, I think. I'm super happy with the fit of this. I love where the slit is. And now here is my final project. It is totally a win. I love where the princess seams hit me. I love where the bodice is hitting me. I'm so glad I did this small amount of shortening. I feel excellent in this. Now make sure that you shop this new pattern at the sale for its release, as well as our 40% off sale. And now let's check out all the makes from the rest of the Lenox testers.